Hey, everybody. Jon Sherwood here with Unpolished Podcast. Please like and subscribe, rate and review on your favorite platform if you haven't already. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to share a little bit today about what it's like for me as a pastor to be pastored to in a microchurch setting. And so I'm going to jump into a little bit of what it's been like for me personally as a vocational minister and pastor for 20 plus years to walk into and experience a microchurch that I'm not leading. There's another pastor who is pastoring that microchurch and that I get to be a part of and participate and experience. And I remember the first time this really sticks out to me when I walked into a micro church at someone else's house in our network. My wife and I and our family were a part of their micro church. And I remember not having anything to do with the service. I didn't plan any of the service. I didn't know what was going to be happening. I just showed up. And I remember that by itself of just feeling like I could show up and experience church, experience God, experience fellowship with my brothers and sisters without having to be at work was in and of itself like jarring, refreshing, confusing. It was a whole range of emotions. And I remember crying during the microchurch gathering. And I remember crying and thinking to myself, I can't remember the last time I cried at church. And this is just my own personal experience, my own personal narrative, my own personal story. And I think what I realized in retrospect after that event is that there was a part of healing that was happening in my own heart. I sensed that God was trying to make me aware of some things and that I was starting to experience God in fellowship with other believers that I think I really hadn't in a long time. And that was very sobering and was like an aha. It was like a clarifying moment of clarity. And so I remember sitting there in a living room with a micro church. It was probably about, 10 to 14 people, somewhere in that range. And we were singing and we were praying and we were sharing what was going on in our lives and how we were seeing God move in our lives. And I just was overwhelmed with being able to see God and Jesus in these brothers and sisters that I was sitting with. And it was occurring to me that in my normal experience with church, I really wasn't able to see other people like that. I was typically running the service. There was a pre-service huddle where we would go through in detail who was doing what and for how long and what timing, and I was usually preaching a sermon, and I would have as meaningful and as engaging a fellowship as I could with people. Beforehand, before service was honestly quite difficult for me because my headspace, my mind was somewhere else. My mind was in the space of trying to run the service, to put on the service and the show. And all my motives were good in that. It wasn't like I was trying to dupe people or entertain people, but that's just where my mind space was. And that was where the majority of my energy was going to. Fellowship after the service typically was better for me because I was kind of like, whew, like the final, whistle had gone off and service was over. And so I was kind of able to like more meaningfully engage with people and my mind really be present. And if you were ever one of those people that engaged me before service and you got that just kind of like blank stare and like happy smile, like I apologize. Okay. But that's what was going on. It wasn't personal. My mind was just somewhere else. And then I sat there in this micro church early on. This has happened multiple times since, but early on, one of the first times I remember of sitting in this living room and being overwhelmed with emotion of just, I feel even emotional talking about it now, just seeing Jesus in other people that I really couldn't see before, or that I didn't see, or that I didn't take the time to see, or that I was distracted with my vision and my attention focused elsewhere, whatever it was, something happened that day in that microchurch expression where I just wept and I cried. And I remember I said something to my wife on the way home, something to the effect of, I can't remember the last time I felt like that in church. And I don't even know how to describe it or like what to call it or what verbiage or language or vocabulary, what adjectives to use. But I think I just experienced God. I experienced Jesus in his body in a way that maybe I had never, or certainly in a long time had not. And all of a sudden, I told my wife, I said, I really like going to this church. And so for me as a pastor, it was like I was being shepherded by the good shepherd and also through the microchurch pastors and this microchurch body that were in many ways unknowingly to them, and I certainly wasn't expecting it. I was being ministered to and restored and refreshed. I was being led to quiet waters and green pastures that I didn't even know I was missing or looking for or longing for. And I met Jesus there in a way that I could not have expected. And up to that point, it's like I had been chugging along in the process of this transition to try to transition a traditional church into a microchurch network model. And we had been doing that in community, and me and other leaders were involved with that. And it was a long process, a couple years. And I remember just feeling like the grind of the transition. And then when I left that day from that microchurch gathering, I thought, I can see it. I can taste it. I can touch it. I just experienced what we are all hoping for. And it was like, the fruit was so sweet. It like made sense. And it was like I caught a vision like never before of what this could be like and what I was going to experience personally, my family, my children, and what other people could experience. And so it was just an incredible thing that like opened my eyes in ways that I couldn't have anticipated. And so for me, as I think about what is it that these microchurch expressions offer, and again, the way that we're approaching microchurch expressions currently can change on a dime, and there's many ways to do this, but just a level of intimacy and experiencing and seeing Jesus in one another, I thought was so rich and so special, and it was so healing just for my own heart. And since that time, that meeting that happened was probably at least 2 or 3 years ago. And since that time, I've met in many micro churches since, and many different micro churches. And I have never personally pastored a micro church up to this point. I've only been a part of micro churches that other people are pastoring in the network. And that has been so refreshing to me. And it's like I'm able to see the movement and hand of God better. I'm perceiving the work. Jesus said in John, I believe it's John 5, that his heavenly Father is always at work. And it's almost like I'm getting better at perceiving where God is at work in people, in individuals, in lives, and in families, in these micro church expressions. It's like I'm able to see God more clearly and able to see people grow in God more clearly. And I think this might have been mentioned on a previous episode, but by my buddy James, but I think it's like in this expression, it's like I get a better row seat. It's like I have a more expensive ticket to the life of my brother and sister and them to me. And perhaps them to me even more than anything else, because of course, on the stage, in the pre-meeting huddle, vocationally paid to run the service, it's like people have such a back row seat to my life and to my heart and my character. And I think that's what makes moral failure so susceptible in that role. That's why I think the bigger the stage, the more the audience and real people, image bearers, flesh and blood, image bearers of God, they get removed from that image bearer of God. And this stage and this audience, the gap grows wider. And I think it gives bigger cracks for Satan to worm his way into, and for the evil one to create deception. And that's where moral failure happens. And so I feel like for me as a pastor, being pastored in these expressions, it has actually even helped call me to greater accountability, to greater vulnerability and transparency, to being known more and to be able to know others more. And it has been absolutely beautiful. And so I just thank you guys for being on this journey with us. I'm praying and we are all praying that in some way God might use what we're doing here at Unpolished to impact you in your context. You probably, if you're a part of a church, you're probably a part of a small group of some kind, shape, or form. And hopefully you can implement some of these ideas, have some conversations with people, try to create some environments where you can experience Jesus in one another as we have. Thanks again for being here. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.